Okay, so this is church planting, and this is my testimony of how God worked in my life and my wife's life to get us on the mission field. And it's like anything; it was incrementally. It was step by step, and so maybe I can just go over some of those steps. I was saved in South Berwick in early 1976, and of course every one of these steps is a story in itself, but the focus is church planting. But when we think of our steps, there's a sweetness that comes with it. We can go back there in our mind and just savor the sense of the presence of God, the work of God, the changed life, the people that He used to do that. It's very rich, and we're so thankful. Strangely enough, from getting saved, it was the same year that I joined the Peace Corps. You might wonder how that piece fits in the puzzle. The Peace Corps is not a Christian organization at all. But it just, as a new Christian, I figured that I should do something to help people. So I signed up for the Peace Corps, but actually the probability of me being accepted was pretty low. And they told me from the outset that normally about 25% of those, or 1 out of 4 that apply, is accepted. It was at that point that I went to church Sunday night and Pastor Stevens preached a barn-burning message about doing things we think we should do without really finding out from God. And so that was a bad night for me. And, so I had every believer that I knew on the planet praying for me that, I asked forgiveness and asked for God to lead me in His perfect will. So it was some months later that I got a phone call that I was accepted. And I went with peace because I really did have the assurance that God was sending me. And so, that was a great time because I met other missionaries and worked with them, though the work that I was sent to do had nothing to do with missions work. Came back and met a lovely young lady named Nancy LaPena and got married. And that was the second smartest thing I ever did in my life. And then I went to Bible school in Lenox. The first year that I was in class, I was sitting in the chapel toward the back, and God somehow really put it on my heart as Pastor Stevens was preaching about missions that he wanted me to go to Ecuador. And it was then that I thought, wow, that's amazing. Gee, maybe that's why you sent me there in the first place, because I learned to speak Spanish and knew a lot of people. So went to Bible school, and speaking about the steps, this whole thing works by faith. And by faith, we went to Poughkeepsie, New York as a student, a group of us, and went there to start a Bible study. And God met us there, gave us a man from Italy, opened up his pizza store and said, you can have your Bible study here. We were doing mime in front of his restaurant. We thought he was coming out to tell us to move away. Instead, he was telling us to move in. And so that was great. During the Bible study, he was probably the only one who tithed. And his tithe throughout the year was enough for me to go to Ecuador every summer to just prepare. So we just saw how all all the pieces fit together. It was really beautiful. It was during that time that I went to pay my bill at the finance office. I don't know if any of you know Eileen now, because now she's quite a bit older, but I went to pay my bill and she said, "Oh, John Hadley." She said, "Are you the one going to Ecuador?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, I'm going too." She said, "I don't know where it is, but God told me I'm going." And in fact, she did, and she was there probably eight or 9 years. She was kind of the church mother, and one of her, it's not in the Bible, but I'll tell you, she blessed the body in Guayaquil by, believe it or not, one of the many things she did was bake brownies. And she was known for greater things than that, but I'm just saying, God gives us many different gifts and talents and abilities to bless people, and she used them, and she was wonderful. So we went in 1985. We went with a small team, 2 families in Eileen, and then we had other families join us later. And we lived in a team house, and we just started knocking on doors around the house in that city block, and we had probably about 10 or 12 people right from that immediate area that came out and started to attend. And we had, God allowed different things to happen that would really speak to people and draw them. I tell the story of one time the city shut the water off for 3 days. And we had a cistern, one of the only houses in the neighborhood that had a cistern. And I started allowing a few of the neighbors to come and get some water while the news traveled. And it ended up that people were up and down the sidewalk with buckets. And our cistern was not a swimming pool. It was just it was smaller than this platform. And so I was ready to tell them to shut off the water, no more water, because we're not going to have any water. So that's that. And I was about to do that. And then I really sensed the Holy Spirit just say to me, "Why are you here?" And so I got everyone together and we talked about it. And I said, "Okay, let's pray." And we made a deal with God. And that was that if we didn't open the top and look inside, that we would just let people, we had it in the morning and late afternoon, that people could take their buckets full of water. And I mean, it was the bucket brigade. It was way down the sidewalk, and every day the buckets got bigger. And after 3 days, the water came back on. We never, and I had a couple verses right at the water spigot, because people knew who we were and why we were there. And, people didn't forget that. God was faithful. That was really cool. We had, right from that area, over 100 Sunday school kids. And we had, I wish we videoed it, we had kids, the rope with the knot on it, and all the kids holding onto the rope and crossing the busy streets. And it was amazing. We had to rent another place just for the kids because there were so many. And just a little funny story. It used to rain during the rainy season very heavily. The streets would fill up, and one day our oldest daughter, Joanna, and I had her by the hand, and we're walking, picking up some of the kids. And I fell in a hole because I couldn't see it because it was just a puddle. But it's common for the sewer covers not to have, covers. And so one leg went down, and I caught myself with my hands, and Joanna she was probably about 6. She's just crying and crying. Joanna, it's okay, I'm okay, Dad's okay. And then she's still carrying on, and Joanna, I'm okay, I'm going to go home, take a shower, change my clothes. And she's still crying. I said, what's the matter? She said, you got my new shoes all dirty. So she had these new patent leather, white, dainty little shoes and her white dress on. Whole lot of love going on right there. So, God blessed us, and we outgrew that place, so we had to get another place, and we didn't really have the money for another place, but you know how it is, you look and you check off your list, no, and then you end up with nothing, and you go back to the first place and you go, I think this is the one. Well, we still had no money. So we had no choice, though. If we were going to grow, we had to make that decision. And so we did it by faith, and we really didn't have the money, and I was kind of worried about that. And it was right about the yearly time when I went home to visit, and I got a phone call that someone had put $20,000 in our account. And I don't think they knew about that, but. And so, we just look back and say, God, you were so faithful every step of the way. It's not magic. And I don't want to romanticize going to the mission field, because there was a cross, and there was a cross every day. But that's the way it had to be, and that's the way we wanted it to be. And so we moved to the other place, the other location, and ended up with, I guess, about 50 people, and then the Sunday school. But God handpicked people to be in the church. We had so much fun evangelizing. We had this contraption. It was called the Blue Cow, and it was a sketchboard platform that had wheels on it. And the kids would sit on it, would push it to the park, and we could always get crowds of people to listen to the gospel. Not crowds of disciples, one here, one there, but a lot of people heard the gospel. And like Pastor Schaller was saying, the sense of the presence of God, we would always leave with fear and trepidation and come back rejoicing. So happy that we went. Every time it was the same. One time the police came to our door. We went there with visas to teach English. And the immigration police came to our house, knocked on the door, opened the door, and looking at these guys like, what are they doing here? And they said, John Hadley? And I said, yes. And they said, sign this paper, you have 72 hours to leave the country. And I said, but our lawyer is working on the papers, and he told us everything's fine. And they said, well, your papers have been rejected. It turned out the lawyer wasn't doing anything except taking our money. And so that was quite a blow. And so I got everyone together, and I said, I just got the news. And so that was an evangelism night. And I thought, okay, do we pack our suitcases or go soul winning? And I said, we're going soul winning. So we went downtown to the park as usual. And the guys were there waiting for us. Not the police, but the disciples. And it turns out that Franklin Beltran, when we were soul winning, met a relative of his who's from a different town. Well, actually, he was living there at the time. He said he hadn't seen him for a while, and they got to talking, and he told him our situation about the visa. Turned out that his uncle was the head of, it's called the Departamento de Extranjería, like Foreign Affairs in Quito. And so he came over and he said, tell me about you and your family. He said, you have any children? Yes. You have any children born here? I said, yes. Actually, it was David right there. And they said, and my wife's pregnant with another child. And he said, okay. He said, I can have your residency visas, permanent residency visas, in I think he said like 2 weeks. And of course, I just rolled my eyes. But we had our residency visas in 2 weeks that gave us the right to live in Ecuador as residents for the rest of our lives. And you know, I just look at that, like the you know, the principle in that I learned is that just that obedience to that the answer to the problem is in the next step of obedience to God, because that little crisis happened, but the answer was go soul winning, because if we hadn't gone, we wouldn't have met him, and wouldn't have got the visas. So I think about different people. I think about Juan Franco, who's now pastoring the church in Quito. He was a teenager. He really didn't like me at all. I would visit his house, and he wasn't saved, and visit his stepfather and his mother. And he was, I think, anti-American, really. And he was very quiet. He would just look at me like, you know, what's the real reason why you're here? Why are you in my house? I don't trust you. I don't like you. Well, his mother made him go to church a number of times, and finally he got saved, and turned out to be really an outstanding disciple and has a real communication gift. That was Juan. Eduardo Valle, who graduated from here, where the first church was, it was on one of the main streets that led to the university. We would have throngs of people every evening going to classes and then coming back. And we were out soul winning in the front of the house. And we met Eduardo, and he was a communist and looked like Che Guevara with his little chin thing. But he didn't believe, but he went to church, but he brought his girlfriend, who was Ana. And so she did get saved, and then he ended up getting saved. Michelle Castro, who was in Peru now, she's from Ecuador. She was the daughter. We had a girl in our church, she was a maid. She was a maid for the Castro family. So she ends up talking to Michelle, who was a young teenager, who ended up coming to church, getting saved, then her sister, then her father and mother. The stories are just amazing, how God works. We had one family around the corner, a mother and her 4 daughters, and God did amazing things in that family. So many testimonies of how God works. It is truly amazing. Lots of fun, lots of laughter, sometimes lots of tears because of disappointments. Always having to pray and trust God. One month I think we got in under $100 for support. And I thought, wow, this is great. This was at the beginning. And it turned out that Aline got like twice as much money. Didn't even know how it happened. But she just said, here, you can have my extra money. You know, because before we say I do to the Lord when it comes to going somewhere, we don't have all the answers. What about this? What about that? We can't answer those questions. But if God sends us, then God will supply. And that was the amazing thing that we saw again and again and again, was the faithfulness of God. We had a wonderful missions trip. We went up to the mountains and had a radio program. And there was a man from way up in the mountains, and he would write to us, and I guess he walked into town once a week, and he would write to us and say, when are you going to come to visit me? He and his family, his wife, 2 daughters. They had a little farm really in the middle of nowhere up in the Andes. And so we would correspond. We would answer his letter through the radio. And so after maybe a year or two, we said, okay, we're going to go visit you, so send somebody down in the town and have him waiting for us, and we should be there approximately at such and such a time. And you know, it was just, we had the time of our life, traveling, fellowshipping, soul winning, laughing. And it turned out the bus dropped us off, went down the dirt road, dropped us off, and while the guide was taking us up to this house, we're trekking up the mountain and walking. One of the guys from Chile sprained his ankle. Another guy fell backwards into one of the brooks, climbing the mountain. It started raining and the trail turned to mud. Now it's dark and raining, and the guy that was leading us kept saying it's just a little bit further. So I almost drowned him not really, but. And so finally, we're about passing out from exhaustion, and it's miserable. And so when we couldn't go anymore, he said, I'm going to go and get some horses. And so we said, yeah, whatever. And we just passed out lying in the mud in the rain. And finally it stopped raining. And I woke to the sound of snorting horses. Don't ask me where he got the horses with the wooden saddles. And there was 2 of us on a horse. And I just remember just thanking God for this missions trip. All I can say, I've never kissed a horse before, but I wanted to kiss this beast of burden because it's going up this steep incline with 2 of us on it, slopping through the mud in the dark, knew the trail, and I'm just thinking, God, you created this animal. This is amazing. I don't know if you know what I mean, but I just felt like he saved my life, wasn't complaining, and just doing his work. We finally, up through the clearing, we could see these little lights flickering. They were candles. And there was the Quille family. All the mangy, savage little dogs are barking, and flea-bitten, because they really were nasty things, snarling. And then Mr. Quille comes out. And of course, I'm covered with mud, and we embrace and talk, and looking at each other and laughing. And he goes, "Well, I'll get you. Let me get you another pair of pants." So he gets me another pair of pants. I go in and change, and of course, Mr. Quille is this tall, and he's about this round. So talk about mocking Pastor Schaller. I was severely mocked by those who were supposed to be my friends. And then, of course, I'm holding up the pants, so I had to get me a piece of rope, tie around my pants up to my knees. And we just had the sweetest time, just fellowshipping, opening the Bible, and that was a very sweet 3 days. Just the rest of that story, just to show, God sprinkles joy along the way and gives us memories that we never forget. And so the first night I was there, I had to get up and do what we sometimes need to do in the middle of the night. And so I walked outside in my mud between my toes, and I happened to look up, and in a sense I saw the glory of God in the sky, because it stopped raining, the skies opened, and I have never seen clouds of stars before. And I just stood there worshiping God, standing in the cold mud, looking at the sky. I will never forget that moment. Completely taken by surprise, because there's no light pollution, there's no air pollution. And because of the altitude, it was absolutely spectacular. And I just stood there thanking God for his plan and how awesome he is. And then that night, went back to sleep, and I was having like this dream/nightmare of this, like this rooster being on me. But then I realized there was a rooster on me. And I was laying on my side, and there's this rooster perched up on my shoulder. And so I'm startled, like, get off me. And Carlos, who's on the bed right next to it, it wakes him up. Of course, now he's laughing uncontrollably because of the, first the pants and then the rooster. And the whole trip was absolutely wonderful. We had a lot of time together. We couldn't have devotions till we milked the cows. And I was mocked further by his daughters, watching me trying to, milk the cows with my arms aching. But when we were finished, we were about to leave 3 days later, and Mr. Kie said, oh, wait a minute. And he goes into the little house, and he reaches up on the shelf, there's a jar, and there's a wad of money that he had there. He said, this is my tithe that I've been saving, and I want to give it to the church. And it was just one of those trips and one of those times where it's in your heart, and you just thank God for the things he leads us into, and his presence, the joy, the laughter, the tears sometimes, but the fruit that redounds to the glory of God. We could talk about a lot of other things, but trust God, prove all things, hold fast to that which is good. I guess I'll just finish with talking about being a pastor. I always sensed in my heart that God was calling me to be a pastor. But I went through this little crisis when I graduated from Bible school, because I had to ask myself the question, how do you know that you're called to be a pastor? Maybe this is just something that you invented. Maybe this is just something that, that comes from yourself. So I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask my friend, Pastor Palmer. I said, Pastor Palmer, can we talk? He said, sure, let's go out to dinner. We went out to dinner, and we're eating, and he said, what do you want to talk about? What do you want to talk about? Pastor Palmer. And I explained the situation. I said, Pastor Palmer, how do I really know if I'm called to be a pastor? I just fear that maybe this whole thing is, something that comes from me, and maybe it's not God. And as I sat there and waited for his answer, I was greatly consoled when he said, how am I supposed to know? You need to find out from God. So you can see all the trauma I've been through in my life. And, I don't know, I don't say this so that you'll do this, but I was desperate because the whole Ecuador thing was on the burner. And I did not want to take a step without knowing for sure. So I'm not usually a fleece person, but I was out of desperation. And I said, God, I want you to tell me if you want me to be a pastor. And I named him 3 names, and 3 names of pastors. And I said, if you want me to be a pastor, then you tell one of these 3 pastors. And so it was later that week. I went into the cafeteria, and it was full. And there was a table over there, and there was an empty seat. And I went over, and one of the pastors was sitting at the table. I said, "Is it all right if I sit here?" "Sure." I sat down, and he said to me, "So, when are you going to be a pastor?" "When are you going to get ordained?" That's what he said to me. And I heard clearly what he said, but I had to say, "What?" Because it was so good to hear. He said, "So, when are you going to get ordained?" And I said, "Do you think I should?" And he said, "Absolutely." And I was greatly ministered to. And so I went forward by faith, and the rest is history. You know, and sometimes we feel so inadequate, but if God has called us, then He plans on doing the work through us. And it's just a joy to be used by Him, as we know. Okay, thank you. Yes, yeah. Yes, we did. And actually, if you know Nora Beltran, she got saved out because she was an English teacher too. So.
Did you integrate your English teaching with your preaching or with Bible teaching?
No, it was just Spanish. Yeah. Yes, Norm. Pardon? Norm?
How do you know if God's going to call us to be a pastor?
How do I know if God's going to call you? You got to work that one out yourself. Pastor Shelley, were you saying something? Okay. So, yes, Heidi.
So would you say that the thing that decided, like, going or being a pastor for you, like, what was the specific thing that decided that for you? Because you said you don't have all the answers to the questions. Like, so it's basically like you somehow know from God, right? Like how do you know?
Well, the first part I did know because God said go to Ecuador. And I guess that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be the pastor. So I don't know if I understand your question.
I guess, like what is the one thing you go on? Like hearing it from God, like in a specific way, or from another person?
Yeah.
Also?
I think I had, thought that I heard from God. I did talk to Pastor Stevens, talked to Pastor Schaller, prayed, had prayer with the team, those who were going for a long time. We worked together, and so it just kind of developed, and everything was, pieces were coming together. And I think the hardest part, or the most challenging part, was actually setting a date. We had been so long planning, but then when it came time to actually set a date and leave, that was, I just found that to be very interesting. And I do remember when we finally left, I had the worst airplane ride of my entire life. I really did. It was awful. And it was Eastern Airlines. And it was awful because I honestly felt like I had 50 demons on my chest. I was so discouraged and depressed. And we're on the plane, and people looking at me, smiling. Oh, isn't this awesome? We're going to Ecuador. And I'm sitting there. Yeah, this is great. And actually thought, Lord, usually I pray for plane trips, safety. I thought, Lord, if this thing goes down, I guess maybe, is this considered a martyr? Because the way I feel, I don't care. But I just prayed. I said, Lord, if you want me to do this, you have to help me. You have to help me, because I can't even get out of this chair, honestly. And God is so faithful. I'm telling you, as soon as the wheels and that landing gear touched the tarmac, the runway in Guayaquil, Ecuador, that horrible oppression lifted just like that. And I got off that plane ready to sing and dance, and it was truly amazing. So there is opposition. And sometimes it's very fierce, and it comes different ways. But God is greater, and the wicked one really touches us not. Sometimes it seems like we can feel the breath of his presence, but he cannot touch us. And that's a beautiful promise. So I think it's 8 o'clock. Yes, Sean?
Just in light of what Pastor Shana today taught, 3, 12, and 120. I was just thinking, like you said, in 85 you moved, and then there were 10 to 12 members soon enough, right? I don't know how long the gap was. The question is, I've seen, whenever new things are planted, church or some other activity, were there people, a core group that actually joined you in the initial 10 to 12 people, and they stick through the years?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was Juan, there was Carlos, there was Miguel, there was Nelson, there was, I guess probably about 6 or 7 guys. When I would come here, I had the great privilege of rotating about 7 guys to preach, and that was really good. It was awesome. Okay? Okay. God bless you.